greater outcomes in terms of housing and employment and all that, but also because of what happens inside the facilities. I don't think folks know, when we talk about mass incarceration, the toll that it's also had on the people working there. The average life expectancy of a correctional officer is 59 years old. So society has created a situation where we've pushed the people working and the people residing in corrections off into the periphery. And we've essentially done it under the acknowledgement of, we'd like you to punish, but also correct, but punish, but also correct. And it doesn't necessarily work well when you try to join those two together logically, emotionally, psychologically. And what they do in Norway, which we found out, is they see punishment as the taking away of freedom. So they allow the judicial chain, the judicial branch, to make the decision on the punishment. And they task corrections with the rehabilitation part of it, which they talk about as creating good neighbors. And so shortly after taking that trip, which was eye-opening for all of us, we came back and we had the conversation, can this happen in Connecticut? And we had it across a number of elements of the system. But to date, the one that has taken it most to heart and has driven it into action is the Department of Correction. And a lot of that was under Lali Garcia. And I just want to personally thank her for that. We're now working at York and Garner, our mental health facility, trying to make better environments for everybody that's in there, trying to set up the infrastructure so that we can talk about higher ed in an environment that is supportive of it, and all the other things that happen within the facility. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank Lali, and she's going to be introducing our next panel here.
Thank you so much. You didn't have to thank me. It's a team effort, but thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so happy to be here, and Commissioner Quito sends his regrets. He was able to spend the morning with us, but as you can imagine, he has a very jam-packed schedule, so had to scoot out. So I will be presenting our panelists this afternoon. But before I do that, I just had a few words. You know, it's a pleasure to be here with you today, but before I say anything else, I just wanted everyone to give each other a round of applause, because without all of you, we wouldn't be able to do all of the great work that we do. It takes the partnerships that we have with you and the stakeholders to make you know, all of these dreams and these accomplishments come to fruition. So if you don't mind, if we could just give each other a round of applause. Because it's a lot of hard work and it's a lot of operating in the gray, and I know that we truly appreciate it. So would like to thank Undersecretary Karpowitz and our governmental officials and the Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy at UConn for making this week's events possible. So thank you so much for that. Studies have shown that the power of education is transformational in ways that are tangible and measurable. For example, a study by the RAND Corporation reported that incarcerated individuals who participated in educational programs were on average 43% less likely to return to prison compared to individuals who did not, which is huge. Additionally, it is estimated that for every dollar invested in correctional education programs, $4 to $5 are saved on 3-year reincarceration costs. So not only is it the right thing to do morally, providing educational opportunities for those under our care is also good for the bottom line. That is why I'm proud to say that the Department of Correction was among the first prison systems selected to be part of the Second Chance Pell pilot program back in 2016. Since that time, the Department of Correction has continued to expand opportunities for individuals to receive post-secondary education. At present, we are partnering with 11 universities and have well over 300 students enrolled in post-secondary classes at 10 of our facilities, 10 of our 13. So we're almost at full complement there. To be exact, we have 390 Pell students and 450 students enrolled in higher education. So we're extremely proud of that. We are eager to do more. I know we've accomplished a lot, but we know that there's more to be done. And we're really excited to break down those barriers and come up with solutions with our partners to make things more possible for the state and for our individuals in our custody. And that is why I believe that events such as these are so very important. It gives stakeholders the opportunity to get together and envision a different future, to share ideas, to learn what does and what doesn't work, and to think about the things that are working. I can't help but think of the next panel of speakers that we have, and it's my privilege to have been asked to introduce them to you today, the Maine Department of Corrections delegation. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce to you Laura Rodas, the Director of Education, Staff Development and Training from Maine DOC, Mark Spahr, the Director of Education and Technology from Maine DOC, and Dan McGloin, the Director of UMA Prison Education Partnership. If we can give them a round of applause.
Again, Laura Rodas. I am the Director of Education, Staff Development and Training for the Maine Department of Corrections, and I'm going to give a little brief bit of context about myself and then hand it over to my colleagues to give a little bit of context about themselves before we sort of move into the program. I've been with the department going on about 3 years now. I did work in higher education as an Associate Dean of Students, coincidentally at the University of Maine at Augusta, worked in networks for about a decade, and before that I worked in corrections. And so I come to this role knowing quite a bit about post-secondary education, and also have quite a bit of history in correctional work as well. Mark?
Well, good afternoon. Excuse me, I'm very happy to be with you all today. My name is Mark Spahr. I'm the Director of Education Technology for the Maine Department of Corrections. I've been with the department, I'm in my 22nd year now. The first 20 of that was as the culinary arts instructor at Mountain View Correctional Facility in Charleston, Maine, working first with juvenile residents and then with adults. I've been in this role for about 1.5 years now, where I oversee all the computers and networking for residents in every facility in the department.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dan McGloin. I'm the director for the University of Maine at Augusta's Prison Education Partnership. Notably, I was previously the academic manager for the Wesleyan Center for Prison Education. So I'm here in a bit of a unique position where I have some perspective on how it works up in Maine and comparing and contrasting it to how it's been working in Connecticut over the last few years. And it'll be nice to just share some thoughts about that a little bit later this afternoon. And I just want to say how nice it is to see a number of familiar faces this afternoon, along with a number of new faces. Thank you.
Yes, when Brittany invited us to participate in this, I said, well, we've got to bring Dan because he's worked in Connecticut and he's also worked in our space now, and so there are different assets and strengths of each program. There's probably good things to take from everyone, and I think he's uniquely positioned to help share. Uniquely positioned to help share that viewpoint. I think if I move away, that'll work. Okay. All right, so we're going to cover some basics of our system. We do things quite a bit differently in Maine, and some of you may be familiar with it. We sort of coined it the Maine model of corrections. We have incredible leadership who unfortunately was not able to be here today, but Commissioner Randy Liberty in particular has been a champion of really moving towards more humanized practices in corrections. Because we operate in the correctional space, and a lot of folks think, oh, Maine, you don't have the same problems as we do, or may not know sort of the size of our system and stuff. I thought I would just start with a little bit of context, and I realized that this is small. It's not all like this, I promise. But we have 7 facilities, about 1,835 people in our care and custody. That includes both. Is there an emergency alert? Is it a tornado? Are we good? Okay, we're good. So we have 7 facilities. One of them is a youth facility. I don't know how to make the noise stop, I'm sorry. So one of them is a youth facility, and in our care, we only have about 35 youth. We have different types of facilities. We, of course, have secure facilities, which is what you're going to typically think of in terms of a fenced, higher classification facility. We have all the way down to reentry facilities where people live either during the day or night, depends, but they also work in the community. And so that will become potentially important later on when we talk about things like remote work. We have only one location where we have women, and there's a secure facility, and then sort of down the hill is also a reentry center of the same kind where people can work in the community. So like many facilities, or like many states, we have facilities that are located in very rural areas. Do you think that'll make it better or worse?
No, you're fine.
Okay, great. So we have facilities located in very rural areas. We don't have very many that are in urban areas. So the geographical challenges that probably others face, we face as well. One of the things that we have also really worked on in the past almost decade now is reducing our level of folks who are in restrictive or segregated housing. I saw a slide earlier that said keep people engaged in education even if they're in segregation. We don't do that because we really don't have very many people who are in segregation. We had 6 people in administrative segregation in the month of, I guess, August. And so out of 1,830 or so. And so we have really taken a conscientious effort to reduce the amount of people who are in those sorts of settings because we have found that it isn't helpful for rehabilitative efforts. And so we don't really do any long-term segregation. This slideshow covers a whole bunch of things. It's 90 slides. I'm not putting you through that in an hour. We are skipping a lot of them, and we won't actually flip through them. But I say that because I'm glad to share the slides or the PowerPoint, a link to it, where you can learn more about things like how we have addressed restrictive housing. So really the main model of corrections is an operating philosophy. And over time, the practices have built. It isn't that one day we just decide, here are the things that we are going to do, and then try to start doing them. If anyone's ever tried to make change in an organization, you know if you just tell people to start doing things, they don't magically fall in line, and especially in entrenched settings where people have done what they've been doing for a very long time. But what we noticed was that we were changing our practices over time, and so really we tried to sort of put it into a framework that would help people understand what those changes look like and make it more part of our fluid language about how we talk about the work that we're doing. And so in 2022, we went through a process of updating our mission statement. And I believe Connecticut has, at least what I read on their website, there are some updated initiatives around becoming more progressive and employing practices that are more rehabilitative in nature. I'd say that we sort of took a similar approach, and in the past, this was our mission statement. It was to reduce the likelihood of juvenile and adult offenders reoffending by providing practices, programs, and services that are evidence-based and which hold the offenders accountable. That was our mission statement for almost 20 years, and at the time, it was really actually fairly progressive, using evidence-based practices. We all like that, right? And holding people accountable. But we started to feel like it did not necessarily capture the work that we were trying to do, that it maybe set the bar too low. That it's not enough to say, hey, we want you to not come back to prison and that's the only thing we care about. That isn't the only thing we care about. And so our new mission statement is making our community safer by reducing harm through supportive intervention, empowering change, and restoring lives. And so words matter. We'll talk a little bit about that. I'll try to be brief. Feel free to tell me to move along if I'm delaying too long in one place. I'm really talking to my colleagues.
Move along.
Move along. And so we're really trying to set a higher bar that we want people to be successful in the community. We also want to make our community safer because those folks who are returning to our communities are able to be the good neighbors that they want to be. This is in my own head the way that I try and break down things, but so don't quote me. Well, you can quote me, but it's not necessarily the department, I guess. the overarching principle that we're trying to live by every day in all of our interactions is to treat people with dignity and respect. That is not something that we do only with incarcerated people. We need to do exactly the same things with our staff. And I appreciate the comments earlier about the shorter length of life for correctional officers and people who work in these institutions. It is a higher stress environment at times. We do need to be mindful about how we are working with our officers and supporting their wellness, and also doing what we can to make the spaces safer and more enjoyable. It turns out you can become a correctional officer and enjoy your work, and we have lots of proof of that. So the principles above and beyond the treating people with dignity and respect are fourfold. Humanization, normalization, reducing stigma, and incentivizing opportunity. Again, it's just sort of how I slice it in my head. But dynamic security underpins everything. And so that is a principle that's been brought over, I would say pretty clearly we plagiarized Norway, their model, right? Dynamic security, it's about creating relationships with people. That when you have professional rapport, you're really doing prevention rather than intervention. It doesn't mean that you can't set limits. That's one of the things that we had to work with our staff pretty clearly on, because at first when we started talking about this, they thought, well, that means you let residents get away with it, whatever. That's not what we're saying. Just because you ask somebody to do something, they don't immediately do it, they're allowed to have an opinion, they're allowed to ask a question, those sorts of things. That's showing dignity and respect. It doesn't mean that at the end of the day, I mean, we all have kids here, right? Many of us do anyway. Your kid can say, I don't want to do it, because you might listen to them, right? And you evaluate their request. And then you decide, okay, what's the right outcome here? You still have that, that responsibility as a parent or in the setting, in an authoritative, quote unquote, manner. But what we found is that when people are interacting in really, building good professional rapport, we have found that it is leading to better outcomes. In the slideshow that we probably won't get to, we have the data, but I'm glad to share the data. We've seen over time reduces in assaults on officers, assaults on other residents, and what else? Oh, fewer contraband things, fewer weapons, fewer self-injurious behaviors.
Can I jump in on that
Yeah.
for a second?
Mark?
I just want to talk for a minute about what Laura just said about reducing assault on staff, reducing assault on other residents. And in a little bit, I'm going to talk about how we've been able to do some of the things that we've been able to do. And really, it started with this visionary leadership that we've had, and it filters all the way down to the correctional officers. And you have to, we have found that you really need to get the correctional officers on board with some of the educational goals that we have set out to accomplish. If you have them on board, they're going to support not only what we're trying to do as staff, but also what the residents are trying to do as students. And if you want to convince a group to support something when it comes to COs, show them that it's going to make their job easier, show them that it's going to make their life better, and show them that the likelihood that they're going to come to work and be assaulted or have to put hands on to a resident is going to go down if we do these things.
Thank you, Mark. For instance, our first use of force at our second largest facility was May 10th of this year. For the correctional folks in the background, you probably get that that's, and it wasn't even, a big use of force, but our first use of force at a facility was in May. We just don't have the same kinds of problems. However, if you'd like to see how historically we've had those problems, Google Solitary Nation for Frontline. I won't show you the pictures because there's a lot of blood and other things in it, but you can watch a documentary on how difficult our correctional settings used to be. So it's not that we've never had these problems, it's that our practices these days really have changed the entire framework and the dynamics within our facilities. To be clear, things are not perfect. I will always say that. We have room to grow and to progress, but things are substantially different than they used to be. So you have dynamic security, which helps us do more prevention rather than intervention kinds of actions. But the pillars, so to speak, are around humanization. So we've had a number of initiatives focused on things like language matters. We use the terminology of officer, not guard, of resident, not other language. We talk about a person with substance use disorder or someone with problematic sexual behavior, because the way in which we frame these conversations has an impact on everybody as individuals, and also the environment in which we're working. We also know that the way in which we structure our facilities, your environment makes a difference. I remember working in an office where we had mice. It was not great. That was not for the Department of Corrections. But it did not feel great to go in and have mice there and find droppings, right? Your environment matters. So we've really tried to make our environments a lot nicer over time. Even the old ones. Fresh paint does a lot. Adding, you can't really see, those are cacti up there. Adding plants, things along those lines. And again, everything that we do for residents, we also do for staff. So for instance, this sort of dim picture here is a staff dining room that is designed to be welcoming and warm. And so our spaces, we've been trying to make it so that it doesn't feel like prison, but instead more like a college campus. And so it is a bit different than many correctional facilities, and a lot of folks are, worried about sort of the security concerns. When you've got the right pillars in place around how you treat people with dignity and respect, a lot of these other pieces fit into place, and the security concerns that might be top of mind in different settings aren't top of mind. You still need to be mindful about them, of course, but it's not the same kind of problems that you might expect. Normalization, another principle that folks are probably reasonably familiar with. We're trying to replicate, quote unquote, the real world to the best that we can. That includes things like excellent communication. Residents are part of advisory councils. Both residents and staff have the ability to do input in policy making. And then we've had a lot of policy changes over time where we are really trying to do more collaborative problem solving. We're trying to give people the opportunity to have input, and we're allowing residents at times to have input and decision-making choices. In a correctional setting, that's often very unusual because, well, I guess I won't say why, I don't know exactly why, but lots of folks in correctional settings are not given agency and choice. And so we're not saying they get to decide all the things, but they should have a voice in this process, and there are things that they should be the deciders of because they know best. For instance, I should not be deciding what somebody's major is. They should be deciding that in concert with their academic counselor or their, career counselor, etc. And then we're really trying to reduce stigma. So we're trying to help frame the work of correctional officers the way it ought to be. These are public servants. They get into this work to make a difference, to keep our community safe, to, in many cases, help rehabilitate people. It is not our job to be a punisher or a cop. We are actually much more akin to coaches, to role models, mentors. The way in which we approach the work, correctional officers are the best situated to help influence change. And so whomever was saying earlier about they are your strength, they absolutely are. And we have so many talented staff among us. In addition, around stigma, we're again not trying to stigmatize incarcerated people. They should not be defined only by their crime. So like another program was saying, we are crime and sentence agnostic as well. And the goal is really to make sure that we are providing the opportunity for people to have transformational change and growth. And we know that, at least in our population, more than 97% are coming home. And so we want to help them become the good neighbors that they want to be. The last pillar is one that is really around incentivizing opportunity. And so I remember talking with a resident who had been through a number of different states previously, and he was talking about right now he's able to actually demonstrate to his family that he's changed. But before, in other times and spaces, he hadn't been able to demonstrate that. He'd say, "Mom, I've changed." Then he wasn't able to practice it. He wasn't able to have a situation where he had to show up to work and do the thing and be responsible. Well, he's able to do that now. And so he's able to not only show his mom and himself that he's doing it, but he's also able to practice those normalized skills of, make sure you call out if you're sick, or show up on time and be prepared or be early, all of those sorts of things. And so change can only happen when people are given the chance, and we want to have a continuum of environments and opportunities. And so people who are in more acute situations, who are not well regulated, they are going to, of course, have fewer sorts of additional bonuses, right? They're not going to have the ability to order Walmart to go. They're not going to be able to necessarily have certain kinds of jobs. But there's always a pathway for them to be able to develop in that way. And so that's the acute end. And when people are in those more acute situations, we're really working on skill building, reinforcing positive values, make sure that we're doing things like Thinking for a Change and other CBT programs, and celebrating their little wins and improvements. And then on the other end of the continuum, the people who are most pro-social, most stable, we want to give them more opportunity. And so that means they get more autonomy and choice, more normalized spaces. They're the ones who are getting the Walmart to go. They get to also give back to the community, mentoring other residents. They might be able to work remotely. There's lots of different things, but what we know is that when people are able to build towards that, once they get there, they really protect it both for themselves and the opportunity for other people in the future. This is the entire presentation that we're not going to go through. We are going to go over to Second Chance Pell.
So the UMA, University of Maine at Augusta, in its current iteration as a prison ed program, it started in 2006, long before the Second Chance Pell experiment began. It started with a very generous donation from Doris Buffett, sister of Warren, who walked into UMA's office one day and was inspired and wanted to start a prison program. And so it began in 2006 and ran at the Maine State Prison in a lot of ways that are similar to the Wesleyan program. It was a liberal arts program, it was all in person, it had a cohort model. And then come along to 2016 with Second Chance Pell, the program was able to expand to another facility, which housed both men and women, and so it was able to expand its services in that regard. Still operating in person. Fast forward a few more years, we hit the pandemic. I'm going to skip the bullet that says expanded Pell and just jump to pandemic, because it was after that that things rapidly changed for the program when we had to move fully online. I say we, which is a little strange because I wasn't here yet, but everyone got a laptop and was starting to take classes remotely with the University of Maine at Augusta, which worked well. There's two sides to this equation of why the program works the way it does. One is all of the forward-thinking measures that the Maine Department of Corrections has embraced that you've been hearing about. The other is that the University of Maine at Augusta, from its inception, has been geared toward non-traditional adult working students and trying to match their schedule and their needs, and has been a leader in remote education since the 80s. And so it was a very, very natural fit for UMA to support Maine's incarcerated population. I walked into a situation where I'm working with a university that sees its incarcerated student population as part and parcel to its overall student population. From the perspective of UMA, there really isn't much difference between one of our PEP students and a UMA student who happens to live in the remote backwoods of Maine. They're both accessing services in largely the same ways. I don't want to downplay a lot of the restrictions that our residents have to face and all the rules and regulations that they face inside when it comes to accessing everything. But from UMA's perspective, when we're working with our PEP students, we make little distinction. As we'll be talking about a little bit shortly, with the laptop access, our students are able to email and get on Zoom with not just the PEP program staff, but UMA staff and faculty in general. I'll stop there for now.
Great. So our goal with the way in which we're operating education programs in the department-wide is to create as normalized an educational experience as we can. And so whether students are in a post-secondary program like UMA or Washington County Community College or other Pell partnership, or they're doing some other type of program like workforce development, we really want to make sure that the same opportunities are available around things like academic advising, tutoring, all of those sorts of kinds of offerings. We also have programs, it's sort of one-offs, I would say, with like MIT, Colby College, Horace Mann, there are a number of them. Columbia. Word to the wise, if you get the opportunity to work with MIT, do it. Because even though it's not a credit-bearing opportunity for a lot of residents, they go into a class with regular MIT students and they do well, they do beautifully, and they start to see that they are exactly the same intellectually, or can be, as a regular MIT student. And so those programs have been one of the biggest drivers of interest in our matriculated programs. So MIT, they do a wonderful job. So we also allow students to do things like internships, fellowships, and we do offer the opportunity for folks to do any level of education. So if they want, associates, that's fine, bachelor's. If they want a graduate degree, that's fine. We have doctoral candidates at this point. So here's sort of a smattering of what we offer. One of the areas in which we're trying to more intentionally grow right now is around more workforce development and career and technical education. We're sort of on the on-ramp to that more intensely. We do have apprenticeships, different certificates and credentials that are offered for workforce development, and so we continue to grow. Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about UMA? And one other thing is just, and Dan will say, but the way in which we have our students sort of situated is that they do take classes with regular, quote unquote, regular on-campus students. And so, a faculty member may not know that a student is incarcerated at all. Sometimes the brick gives it away behind them, but not all the time. And so what a normalizing experience, because they're having connection with other people in the community who are enriching their lives in invaluable ways. And so that's across the board the way in which our programs are set up. UMA?
Thank you. I'll just kind of elaborate a little bit on each of these bullet points for you all. So we do have about 150 students, give or take, in our program across all 7 facilities, serving men and women at all security levels. We are sentence blind, as Laura mentioned earlier. They're pursuing a wide variety of associate and bachelorate degrees. So when the program was new, it was all liberal arts. That was all we could really do, as a lot of programs who are operating inside, and you're dealing with space, and you can only offer so many classes a semester to your students, and so you have to choose carefully about what courses and what majors you're going to make feasible for your students. We still run 4 to 6 classes on site at Maine State Prison, but in recent years, the majority of our students are taking courses online, which means they're doing it side by side with quote-unquote main campus UMA students. Faculty who are teaching these online classes, they don't necessarily know who in their class might be incarcerated and who isn't. And so, in my experience, we perennially get questions from our incarcerated students, am I really getting the same education that everyone on the main campus is getting? And here we can really I'm not saying we don't do that in other programs, but it erases all the doubt in our program because they're literally side by side in the same exact classes that our main campus students are taking, and a lot of times the faculty are not even aware unless the student decides to disclose their carceral status to the professor. Popular majors nowadays are probably computer information systems, business management, mental health and human services. Justice studies is growing in popularity. We have a few students majoring in music. So those are just some of the popular majors that our students take. Similar services to on-campus students. So our students have access to email. They have access to Zoom and all of the same services that UMA students can access through the UMA portal. So they have their own academic advisors. They can email financial. So some of you might be wondering how a staff of 3 is able to adequately support this many students across this many facilities. It's because we don't do it alone. Our students can just, if they have a financial aid question, they can just email the financial aid office and get a meeting with a financial aid advisor, or they choose their classes with their academic advisors. If they want to report something to the dean of students, they can just email the dean of students like any student would. I might not even know about it right away.
There is good and bad to that.
They're able to participate in student life activities. They can submit to the literary magazine. They can, something new we're doing this year is obtaining student employment as UMA students. If it's a position that they can do from inside, they can apply and be considered for student employment positions like any UMA student. And if they get the position, they will be paid like any UMA student employee. That's been very exciting. They can access tutoring, they can access an academic coach, etc. I'll stop there, but it's literally you name it. Our students are able to do it.
One of the nice things that's happened since the pandemic was the university has added additional staffing support. So it used to be just one prison education partnership director, and now there's permanent reentry support and administrative support. And so that's really helped to add on some additional layers because like other facility or other organizations, we have many people who transition out before they are done with their program. Shout out to the University of Maine system. They do not have the box anymore around criminal history, and so residents can, or students can transfer into any of those programs for which they're otherwise qualified without having that as a barrier. Our other Pell partner is Washington County Community College. The majority of their programs are at a distance. They're currently at 4 of our facilities. They're the first of the Pell programs, the UMA is in the process, but to be awarded full Pell status, not second chance Pell. UMA is still in the second chance Pell, and we're in the process of the Pell process. And so, as Dan said, we do certainly offer all the academic and co-curricular activities, new student orientation, participation in student government. UMA, whether distance education representatives is incarcerated, rising scholars, different sorts of academic symposiums and celebrations. So those are all part of the educational experience. We also, and I think Brittany might be in one of these pictures, but we also do lots of engagement with external partners because we know that the more sort of porous our system is, the better opportunity there is for both cross-pollination, but just an enrichment of experience. And so some of these photos are from the National Prison Debate League, but we have partnerships with folks like the Maine Humanities Council, different Across the Walls programs, etc. And we get a lot of questions about, okay, technology, how are you doing this? Because it does seem rather ludicrous. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Mark to explain the madness.
Raise your hand if you think it's crazy to give incarcerated people access to computers. Raise your hand if you think it's crazy to give incarcerated people access to the internet.
I see some DOC hands. It's okay, I'm with you at first, but it can be done. We
It
promised-
can be
We handed
done.
out a blueprint.
It can be done. It's really easy to take a look at this and say there's no way that we can make that work. All it takes is one person to ruin it for everybody else. And I think part of that goes back to culture and mindset. And I had the privilege to meet Commissioner Quiros earlier today. And one of the things that he said to me really kind of triggered this thought is that we need to make sure that when someone does make a mistake with the technology, we don't use that as an excuse to punish everyone and take it all away. And that's something that we've really tried to do in Maine. And we have these people not because they're perfect. We have them because they've made mistakes. And we're in the risk-taking business. And we need to take chances because these are people that are going to get out in most cases, and they're going to be our neighbors, and they're going to live next to you and live next to me. And I want my neighbor to be somebody that's had an opportunity while they were away from society to grow themselves, to become educated, to possibly become employed, and then when they're coming out, they're ready to re-enter society and be productive members of society and be a good neighbor. We were very fortunate in Maine when COVID happened that we were able to get a grant from the federal government. We spent a lot of that money doing things like building out network infrastructure. All of our facilities have Wi-Fi in education areas and in housing areas. All of the housing units have Wi-Fi with very small exception. We bought servers, we bought desktops, we bought laptops. We spent a lot of time and really just finished building it out earlier this year so that we have that complete coverage to make sure that we have those opportunities for our residents.
Now, I know that at least some facilities or some educational institutions in Connecticut have applied for digital equity funds. If you have not and have interest in doing them, applying, there are going to be additional rounds of funding available. These are competitive grants. The last funding rounds were topped out at $12 million apiece. That buys a lot of access points, a lot of laptops, a lot of security network. It also can pay for things like digital skills training. There's a very long list of things. We also happen to know some grant writers who are happy to write them for you. If you don't like to write grants, let me know and I'm glad to connect you with them. Actually, Apple has been kind enough to offer to write grants for these opportunities for correctional entities. And you don't even have to use Apple products, though I'm sure they would not mind if you did. But FYI, if you have interest, you're welcome to reach out and get you connected with the folks. And so, Mark, tell us about our current framework.
So if you are a matriculated student and you're taking 2 or more college classes, we will give you a laptop that you can have access to use and access to the internet for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now when I say access to the internet, and I'm jumping ahead on the slide, that's okay, it is a curated internet. We have a lot of different layers, I call them the layers of the onion of security, that are in place to make sure that hopefully they're staying where they're supposed to be and not going to places in those dark corners of the internet where they're not supposed to be. I mentioned that we have Wi-Fi access in the housing units. We do, part of my job and my team's job is we do observations. We have a tool that lets us observe residents remotely. If anybody's interested, we can take a look later in my laptop, and we can dial into somebody at Maine State Prison or somebody they didn't see what they're up to. Maybe not. But we also do regular hard audits where we collect all the laptops and we go through and, look at their web history and look at the files on their computers and just make sure, you have to inspect what you expect. And, we like to do that, or as Ronald Reagan said, we want to trust but verify. That's it for that, yeah.
We also allow people who are not fully matriculated students in 2 or more classes to have access to sort of library or more communal computer lab settings. And so they can do that for education purposes. They also can be assigned or allowed access for reentry purposes if they're 9 months or less.
Actually, it's 90 days.
90 days, sorry.
90 days.
Oh, it used to be 9 months.
So that, and I'll talk about that reentry access real quick. If we have a caseworker that says we would like this resident to have access, he's within the last 90 days before release and reentering the community, we will give them access and allow them to look for things like housing, look for employment, look for setting up social services while they're out.
And then Mark was sort of jumping ahead, but now maybe we can focus on the curated internet, and sort of we've got 3 buckets and the Cisco umbrella filtering tool.
Sure, and so what we do with that is we grant access to the internet based on need. So those that are at the more of the beginning stages of education, so things like high SED, college transitions, we're going to give them a limited access. As you go into college, they're going to have more access. Things like YouTube, which is actually really necessary if you're doing distance education, higher education, because a lot of college classes are using videos that are on YouTube to help teach their classes. And then it is a restricted YouTube, so we're not allowing them to watch just anything. However, it is there. Dan mentioned email. They have the ability to email. When they are enrolled in University of Maine at Augusta, they get a UMA email address. And then our filtered internet works on the principle of an allow list. So basically it starts with everything blocked, and then we allow things as needed. And just to finish it off, the top bucket there would be like people that are working in graduate, other areas, things like if you have a special major, music is one that was mentioned, we might have a separate bucket for that to give them access to that. And so if a resident comes across a site that they either need for a class or something that they're trying to kind of take a look at, we actually have a set email address. If they come across a block, they can press a button on the block page and they can put in an email, I need this for this class. And then it's sent up to that inbox. We can evaluate it and decide, yes, we can open that, or no, we can't open that. And really, there's 2 people, myself and one other person in the department that do all of that. And it gets really interesting at the beginning of a semester when residents are trying to get all of the new resources for their classes, because college professors like to change things up all the time. It would be too easy if it was all the same all the time. So.
And then this is what our current framework looks like in terms of access and approved uses.
So right now we have a little over 200 laptops that are in the hands of residents 24/7, as I mentioned before. And overall in the department we have about 675 plus or minus a little devices that are out there in the department that are available for residents to use. It keeps us busy. I think the work is worth it. I think providing these opportunities for residents is one of the most important things that we can do in the department. And we started off with saying it can be done. It can be done. And it can seem daunting. How do I do this? How do I bring this to my facility? And the only answer that I have for you is just start. Start somewhere. Start somewhere and take a chance with one group of residents and let it grow. Because it will grow. Because people will hear about it and they will want to have this. And as word gets out, it will grow.
And we see that residents are, very often working hard to maintain this for both themselves and for others, both when it comes to sort of the technology and education access. I know we're short on time, and I want to give Dan a little bit of time to give perspective. I want to just point out a couple of things. One is that, as you've heard, we're really not doing mass punishment. We have done that in the past and taken away everything when somebody messes up. We're still trying to repair some of the harm that's created by that past practice. So we still have residents who are, very nervous that they will lose everything if somebody else messes up. We are treating individuals individually, though, and we do not take away someone's access to education because they screwed up. What we do, unless it's a crime, but if somebody has messed up, they emailed mom, and they're not allowed to email mom, which is different than other kinds of violations, right? But if they had a lower level mess up, we may give them 30-day laptop suspension. That means they don't have their laptop in their unit. They can still come down to education and activities and use it 5 or 6 hours a day. So we are not making it so that people can't continue their education. We do not remove education as an opportunity for folks as a form of punishment. We know that is one of the things that's most helpful for folks. Why on earth would we do that unless there's an immediate health or safety concern? So that's one important point. Another, just to the DOCs, it's really important to talk with correctional staff both about the importance of the programs. Also, you should be providing tuition reimbursement and supporting educational opportunities for your staff. But above and beyond that, it's important to talk with them about the changes, because one of the things that we found is we did not communicate effectively with our staff, and it was residents who suffered the consequences. In our curated framework, we don't say you can't listen to whatever, Spotify, I don't know, you can't listen to music, or it's a problem if you read the newspaper. We don't do that. We allow incidental use, just like I read the paper at work on a lunch break. And that's okay. But for a long time, we said that education, you could only use a computer for educational purposes. And so we've had to broaden that out and help people to understand that, because it's really hard to evaluate with 30 or 40 different majors. How do you know what's educational and what's not? And also, some people like to listen to music when they study or whatever.
Normalization.
It's normalization, right? Thank you, Mark. With that being said, we'll give the last slide. Look, I gave Dan no guidance. I said, Dan, tell us a little bit about your experience. And not everything, it's a lot different. There are some drawbacks of having so much access to technology, but there's some benefits too. Or also, what are sort of your reflections since you've been with us the last year and a half-ish?
Thank you. Last slide, wow. Okay, so it's been a good year plus here, but I would be lying if I said it was all rainbows and sunshine, having all of this technology access and all of this remote opportunities for our student. There's a lot of things I really miss about the way the Wesleyan program was structured and my experience there. When I worked with Wesleyan, I was in facility 2-3 times a week working with our students, and really knew them and had good relationships to support them. If I'm not teaching a class in the prison, I'm probably in one of the prisons or other once a month. And so it's a lot harder to get to know us, and that's true of all 3 of us who work for the program. It's a lot less hands-on, and that is really not in our students' best interest. So on the one hand, they have all this access to not just us, but to UMA staff in general, but just as remote students anywhere versus students who are doing courses in person on campus, it's a little more isolated. It relies on the student to be a little more self-starting and take initiative, and we all know that that's a higher obstacle for most of our incarcerated students. A lot of them do need that encouragement and that support, being there in person. And so one of my bigger picture goals, multi-year push is to find the right balance. How do we embrace the technology and all that it's good for while still keeping our students engaged? Our level of student engagement and student communication really needs help, and I know what it is supposed to look like from my years in Wesleyan. And so, I'm in deep conversations with Laura about that. I'm in deep conversations with my dean at UMA about that, about how do we maintain the culture that we had at Maine State Prison in those first 10 years when it was liberal arts and it was all in person, and we had these really tight cohorts, and we have these alum who have done amazing things. And there's some fear that we're going to lose that if we don't maintain that tight-knit culture among our students inside, and that strong sense of community among them. And it's not, I was happy Dan Karpowitz mentioned liberal arts earlier. You might notice I didn't mention that as one of the more popular majors among our students these days. I don't blame them for jumping into CIS or business management. You can understand why a lot of them would be drawn to something like that. A lot of them are thinking about getting jobs, and they're not thinking about liberal arts as a very attractive major, most of them. And as a philosopher, I champion the liberal arts. I hate to see that. I want to see more of a balance, and so that's kind of an ongoing thing. And the other thing is, because our students are interacting with UMA staff broadly, not necessarily PEP staff, not everyone is well trained in working with incarcerated students, and so we have to do a better job of making sure UMA staff who directly interact with our students have a stronger awareness of how to have those conversations.
Thank you. Thank you. And now we know we have to wrap up, but we just wanted to touch on one more sort of facet of this sort of trajectory.
The last thing I want to leave you with, and Laura mentioned this before, is the idea of work release and working remotely. We have residents, because of the infrastructure that we've put in with technology, that have been able to gain employment where they're working from inside our correctional facilities for outside organizations. There is a resident at Mountain View Correctional Facility who is a computer coder, and he works for a company called Unlocked Labs. And the last time I heard what he was making, it was $55 an hour. He's since been promoted to the prime software engineer for that company. This is a resident who this opportunity, it allowed him to buy a house. He bought a house for when he gets out, he's gonna have a house waiting for him.
His parents bought it with his money.
Right.
We don't allow people to do that.
But he essentially paid for it, so.
Yes, he did pay for it.
If there is anyone that has any questions about how to try to begin to pull this off, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help. Happy to have you come to
We
me.
are continuing to grow remote employment opportunities. We're really looking to partner with more fair chance hiring folks. So that's something that's really sort of the next on the horizon. And as we do that, one of the things we want people to be thinking about, which I didn't think about, even though I have a master's in criminal justice, I did not think until about 2 or 3 months ago, anybody who's long-term incarcerated is not paying into Social Security. And there goes that safety net. That means they don't have, they don't have retirement. They don't have that opportunity when they get out. And so if we can, have people working remotely, they can be earning their Social Security quarters. We know they're paying their child support. They're paying taxes, contributing to our tax base. They are interacting in positive ways. They're filling their resume gaps. They are redefining themselves. It is up to us to help them figure out how to do that. And through technology, we finally are at a point in this nation to be able to stop the antiquated approach that we've had and start really building pathways towards real reentry. And again, that higher threshold bar is not don't come back to prison. It's let us help you build a life that you want and that we want for you as well. So I would be remiss if I didn't say anyone who would like to come up and visit, you're welcome to. Just reach out. We're glad to answer any questions. We're also glad to have you come and see sort of the magic in person. Thank you.